also know you guys got stuff to do for other classes. Now, when I talked to the second period about it, they seemed to think that Wednesday or Thursday was kind of cool. Yeah. I think we had talked about doing it specifically on Thursday because more folks liked it on that day. But I will ask you guys, when would be a better day for you guys to take it? Because if you take it earlier, that means less material you have to know for it. Because basically, what's on the quiz is everything up until that point.
Take it Tuesday.
Take it tomorrow? That's not a good idea. Wednesday I can do, Tuesday not so much. Wednesday or Thursday, something like that. You know, the advantage of taking it later, of course, is you have more time, and also the questions are going to be kind of bigger, like in terms of like, I'm not going to ask you silly things. It's all going to be like, you know, what event got us into World War II, stuff like that. So, you know, it's up to you guys what you think. The nice thing for those who are not sure whether they're going to be exempt or not is I really don't have a lot of grading left to do. Like, at this stage of the game, I'm making finals. By making them, I mean I'm trying to make them. And I've got the study guides and everything ready. So pretty much, you know, it's all good. I can grade these things ASAP. So, you know, if you guys give me, you know, the day, I can have them graded for you. So, you know, if you take it on Thursday, you'll know by Friday. If you take it on Wednesday, you'll know by Thursday, et cetera, et cetera. More or less. I say more or less because, you know, there's still the whole issue of quiz corrections, and I'm not rushing to get quiz corrections done to figure out whether you're exempt or not. I'm giving those folks until the Monday to do this. So, you know, basically in a nutshell, here's your choice. If you want to test your luck and not work on the final exam essays until the day they are due, that is your choice. If you do that and suddenly, crap, you do have to do them, you are going to hate your life. If, however, you are pretty certain that it's not going to affect you one way or the other, you're already exempt, you don't care, then that's pretty much it. Now, those are the essays, as you guys know, for the final exam. You have to pick 2 of them. Each one should be 1 page or so, highest, and it should be printed out by next Monday. Okay? I'll be ready in a minute. I'm just talking about a general essay, you know. This would be like if you're writing on the task, excepting that it's typed, you know. And page, I'm not going to be that finicky about it. This is just like how much I'm expecting in terms of detail. And let's face it, these are kind of giant questions. Why was the Industrial Revolution important? And that could have been a paper in itself. Same thing with World War I, World War II. So, I mean, you got a lot of wiggle room there. You have to pick 2 of them. You can basically get rid of whichever one you don't want to turn in. Otherwise, those are your essays right there. That's 50% of your final exam score. Yes? It is the next Monday. You're right, we don't. No, next Tuesday. Yeah, next Tuesday.
Next Monday.
Memorial Day. No, it's not. It's not. It's Monday after that.
Oh, Devin.
I was like, wait a second. So never mind. False alarm.
Devin, I hate you.
Let's do next Monday.
Yes, Monday.
All right. So I think that's pretty much everything right there. So which day would you guys like to quiz? Wednesday or Thursday?
Wednesday.
Just show of hands. Let me say Wednesday. So Thursday. How many say Friday? And say it is. Take quiz every day. Hey. Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So we're having a quiz on Wednesday. I will not be amending that on homework now. It is Wednesday. I'm telling you this now. It's recorded. It's recorded on YouTube. So this is me telling you I'm not amending it on Edmodo. So you know it's on Wednesday. It's your responsibility to know. Prepare. KK? Understood, yes. This is my recording of you all saying, yes, I understand that it's Wednesday. So if somebody comes on and tells me, Mr. Moe, we never said it was Wednesday, I'll be able to play the recording. It'll totally go that to people.
What did one vegetarian say to the other?
Don't know.
Have you met her?
What?
No, I've never met her before. What? That's not herbivore. What kind of animal can be a boat? A giraffe.
Yeah. These are the jokes I tell my 3-year-old. She can tell jokes. Well, she tells them she didn't quite get it yet, so she just kind of like waits for us to laugh. She goes, ha 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 ha. That's funny. Anyways, so let's talk about the invasion of Poland, why don't we? That sounds exciting, right? So you might remember we last left off with Germany invading Poland. And specifically, they went with their super bros for life until the break treaty, the USSR, and invaded together. Because, you know, that's how you seal a friendship, you invade a country together. It's basically matrimony. But Germany ended up using a new stratagem using what's known as Blitzkrieg tactics. Blitzkrieg means lightning war in German. And it's specifically a type of tactic where you use new technology to maximize speed. Specifically, we're using bombers and tanks in concert together. So the bombers go and they drop bombs, and while everyone's getting bombed, take cover from the bombs, the tanks roll in and using their superior speed encircle the enemy, and then the troops come in behind them, and then basically by the point that the bombing is done, you're completely surrounded and you just get squeezed until that's it. So using the strategy, the Germans were able to counter the tactics of World War I. So, as we're going to see when we get to the Maginot Line, it really didn't do the Allies too terribly much because the tactics had shifted away from this kind of trench warfare style. That's not to say there were more trenches in World War II, but it was just you didn't have these massive static defenses being as effective as they were in World War I. So, in the winter of 1939, the British and the French ended up manning the Maginot Line, which was a series of reinforced trenches along the German-French border, expecting the Germans to attack. But they didn't. The Germans did not want to attack during winter for several reasons. First, winter fighting sucks. It's really awful. With the winter, we have mud, and mud has a habit of keeping tanks and wheeled vehicles put. They can't move in it. Also, think about the extra rations needed to keep the body warm, the calories. You guys ever notice that? Like, what type of food do people eat in the winter? Yeah. Things that are hearty, things that are supposed to stick with you, lots of calories, essentially. The idea is that you actually need more calories during the winter to survive. So, we're talking amplifying this by an army of hundreds of thousands. You're talking a lot of resources spent, not to mention fuel and other expenditures. So what Germany does is they end up hanging out at home and consolidating the places that they've already secured. Meanwhile, Russia is invading Ethiopia, Latvia, and Estonia, and the Allies are just kind of sitting in a hole, just waiting for a war that never comes. So that is known as the Phony War. It's this thing at the very beginning where there's not actually fighting going on. So the early parts of the war are going to be somewhat anticlimactic, but things are going to heat up pretty quickly as we move into 1940. This is a kind of unique device called the Enigma machine. One of the things that we have to understand about World War II is that we have massive amounts of communication. World War I was the first modern war. They were using telephone lines to communicate across fronts. But we have an even higher level of communication in World War II. And the problem with this, of course, is anyone can intercept whatever you're saying. So codes are being used in order for the Allies or the Axis to communicate with each other without the other understanding what's being said. And one of the easiest ways of doing this, and really simplest, is a cipher. I'm sure you guys have seen a cipher, even if you don't know that word for it. You guys know what I'm talking about when I say cipher? Okay. Say you are transmitted a message that you know is 3 letters. But instead, whenever you get your message, it looks like this. X3B. So if anyone says X3B, they're going to be like, what does this mean? Trying to figure it out. Meanwhile, you know, because you have a little code sheet, that X equals C, 3 equals A, and B equals C. So your message is that's right. That's the secret to the war right there. That's a very simple cipher. Okay, you basically substitute word numbers or letters for other letters. Okay, and then usually you break it apart. So if you're sending a message, like the cat says meow, you might have like 4, 2, and whatever equaling the same number of letters. So you break up that message apart. That's a simple cipher. The Enigma machine was a mechanized cipher. It looked a bit like a typewriter, as you can see. And it had these knobs that you could adjust, and whenever the Germans sent the message, it would have instructions like, you know, make certain that knob 1 is in position A, and knob 2 is in position 3, and that would set up the cipher within the machine. So you just copy what the message says on the machine, typing it out, and it prints you the right message, the correct message. So it's actually kind of a genius way of speeding the code back and forth. And for a while, the Allies had no idea what was going on, and it led to a lot of problems for the Allies. Eventually, though, they broke the Enigma machine. It's interesting, the story of the Enigma machine, because for a long time, you know, it was thought that the only way we broke Hitler's code was by capturing the Enigma machine. However, the Allies had broken the code like way earlier than that. We just didn't let anybody else know that because, you know, then, you know, we kind of defeat the purpose of knowing the code because they changed it. But what's weird is there's all kinds of like little things that came out of this. Like, for instance, the Germans, as we're going to see later, began bombing the southern part of England and London. And so, as they were communicating where they were going to attack and win, the RAF, you know, Royal Air Force, just show up where the Germans were. And so, like, the Germans were baffled, like, how are they figuring out where we are? And so to try to keep Germany in the dark, so to speak, what they started putting out was propaganda telling all the citizens of London to be sure to eat your carrots because it's been scientifically proven that carrots make you see better, including see in the dark. And considering the Germans had actually attacked during the dark, this kind of let the Germans believe for a while, man, they're eating a lot of carrots, they must be able to see in the dark, which is why people today think that carrots make them boost your eyesight, which is no scientific proof whatsoever. It's funny how many people still believe that. But anyways, that was, you know, the Enigma machine. Eventually they broke it, and eventually they captured some Enigma machines. Even though there were standing orders for anyone who possessed an Enigma machine to break it the second that they were going to be captured. Like break this machine or die trying, so that no one could capture it. Basically, every time the Allies tried to capture them, they found them smashed until later on. But anyways, communication is going to play an important role. So then in 1940, Germany invades Norway, Denmark, Netherlands, Belgium, and then also in May, they invade France. Now here's what happens. As I said, Maginot Line is there trying to defend the French interior, but using the Blitzkrieg, Germany is able to bisect France, so basically cut it in half, and then start pushing north. And so the Allies are in full retreat until they eventually get to this place in northern France right here called Dunkirk. And so essentially Germany has the British army trapped, as well as a good chunk of the French army. And there's a problem here logistically. Yeah, right over there?
I'm sorry.
Okay. Essentially, the British Army is trapped. So they have to get them across the English Channel. And the English Channel isn't really that big. I mean, it's only 2 miles. I mean, you can swim it hypothetically. If you're a good swimmer. People have done it before. But we're also explaining at the top here, they actually made a truck that floated and drove the truck to France across the English Channel to Calais. But anyhow, that's beside the point. They've got tanks, they've got guys. It's a disaster. If Germany is able to continuously hammer the French army there, the British army there, that's the end of the war. Hitler wins. And so Churchill begins this massive campaign to try to get the troops out of Dunkirk. He's on the radio telling you, if you have a boat, go get the troops. It doesn't matter what it is, just go get them. So I'm talking, they literally bring out everything to get these folks across the boat. They're getting like tugboats, fishing boats, passenger cruise line, whatever they can get their hands on, they're sending across in what's known as the Miracle of Dunkirk, where they get the troops out. But I mean, it's like, we're talking every stupid thing that floats. It wouldn't surprise me if they had a bathtub that was just like rowing across the English Channel. Because like, they did have rowboats, it's like you got 2 guys in your rowboat, you're bringing back, they got the troops out. And the Miracle of Dunkirk was achieved this great success. People were saying, we got the troops out. But, Churchill at the end is like, dude, we managed to run away. That's what we're celebrating, is we ran away. So, I mean, he was very realistic about it. But he also wanted people to have the understanding of where they were. Now, despite that, he's not saying that in like a negative way. He's like, yeah, we should be proud of this. But at the same time, we have to understand that we're our class here. We've got to fight harder than we have right now. We've got to turn this thing around. So with England's support gone, France surrenders to Germany on June of 1940. There's famous photos of Hitler in front of the Eiffel Tower marching Nazi troops through Paris. I mean, this was a disaster. And then, because they've secured the northern part of France, the Luftwaffe is going to start bombing southern England. I'm not sure if you guys, I'm sure you probably have. You've seen The Chronicles of Narnia, The Lion, the Witch, and the Wardrobe. You know how that movie begins with the Germans bombing England? That's what we're talking about. You did go back and watch that movie. It's totally about Nazis bombing England. That's why the kids leave. What's that?
Oh, you're talking about.
Yeah, that's why the kids leave. Oh, no. That's they're at home and they have to leave because the Germans think it's dangerous. So they go to that one guy's house. That's where they find the car. But anyways, I think it's interesting too because kind of reinforces this understanding that they were bombing people's houses. That's what they were doing. The Germans were dropping these bombs on civilians. So there's all these like rules, like hey, turn all your lights off at night so that it's a harder target to hit you. Yeah.
What were those lines that they would use? Were they called something where it just completely black out your houses?
Probably blackout curtains would be my guess. I've never heard that specific term, but there's a thing called a blackout curtain that does that, so that makes sense. I mean, they also have like school drills, like when the air sirens went off, they had bombings come in, they get underneath their desk, just like you prepare just like you would for a hurricane or something, or a tornado, hurricane. Because we have that great coast here in the state of Kentucky. But anyways, this is one of those things that this was the war, That's a photograph from the Miracle of Dunkirk. I mean, these are little tiny tugboats. It's just kind of funny to me because this would be like finding out that there's a war and we should go help out right now. And so we just left school, got whatever cars we had, went and drove to wherever the war front is just to drive soldiers back. And it'd be like, it's such a weird thing. It's a thing in history, but at the same time, this is people's everyday life. It's kind of a weird thing. Anyways, the Luftwaffe started bombing London in 1940. The problem with London as opposed to the countryside, in the countryside you got a lot of houses, so you got people kind of spread out. They get their cellars, they get places to try to get away from the bombs. Where are you going to go in London? It's a giant city. There's people in skyscrapers, things. Where are they going to go to get away from a bomb? Well, I'll tell you what they did. They went to the London Underground. They went to the subway systems. They went to tunnels. They were underground, they were secure. And so that's where they tried to survive. There were stories of the tube system collapsing and keep tracking people in there and things like that, but they were safe for the most part. The thing is, you got to imagine coming out of that and just seeing the wreckage of the city you live in. I'll never forget my father used to live over off Parkstown Road whenever the tornado went through in the 70s, and basically his house was destroyed. I remember he came out of the cellar after the tornado, and the house was just gone. Everything they had was gone. You just got to imagine what that's got to be like. Just trying to have the will to carry on when you have nothing. Kids and things like that, and that's where Churchill really shined. Because he got on the radio and he basically inspired people to keep fighting, to keep carrying on. Not just the soldiers, even just the average everyday person, just to keep ago. And what's interesting is there was a big effort to promote this identity with the war. You know, everyone's fighting the war. And we had a large group of women who wanted to fight. Now, in some places like Russia, they joined the army and that was that. England, though, not so much. They wouldn't let women join the army. But they did end up allowing them to join parts of the Air Force. And not so much to be pilots, that was pretty much banned. But they did allow them to act as anti-aircraft gunners and spot fighters. So there were women fighting in the war in a military fashion. That's where they were in the war. Now, moving elsewhere. Africa. Erwin Rommel was a German tank commander who was arguably the greatest tank commander who've ever been. It's one of those types of things that people didn't fight him because they wanted to. Pretty much anybody who went head on against him lost. So they had to find other strategies to get at him. And one of the biggest problems with tanks is they consume an inordinate amount of gasoline. We're talking, tanks get something like 5 to 8 miles to the gallon of diesel fuel, which is freaking awful. We're talking that there's a huge hunger in the machines for fuel. So he's very effective as long as he has a supply line of fuel, but not so much when it comes to being cut off from his supply. And he's going to be a big problem for the Allies. His nickname is the Desert Fox because of his ability to sort of outthink and outmaneuver his opponents. But what's going to happen is they end up taking territory in northern Africa. German forces helped the Italians take Greece and Yugoslavia, Ethiopia, all these different places. And so basically, at the early part of the war, Germany and Italy pretty much take over everything. It's a pretty disastrous situation, to be perfectly honest, for the Allies. I mean, by this point in the war, I'm looking up something while I'm talking about this, because I forget his name. But during this point of the war, the Germans have pretty much won. And so Hitler basically thinks he's won, more or less. So he ends up going to Russia to try to complete what Napoleon failed to do. There's a pretty cool story from this point of war I'm going to tell you guys about, but it's bothering me to can't remember the name. No. I don't want to list of World War II movies. That has nothing. Jasper Maskelyne. Okay, I had it right, of course. So one of the more interesting stories that came out of World War II, I think, in Africa, was a guy named Jasper Maskelyne. He was a movie director at the time, and sort of like special effects guru. The guy did like early style special effects for movies and also like magic shows, things like that. And one of the things I was talking about with this information campaign was trying to create false information for the Germans. And so what Maskelyne did is use his special effects know-how to fool the Germans in a couple of really neat, interesting ways. For instance, one of the big targets for the Germans in Northern Africa was Suez Canal is how they're moving the Navy. And so if the Germans could take control, they could effectively shut down the British Navy. And so they were bombing, they were trying to bomb it nightly. And so what Maskelyne did is he ended up building a fake Suez Canal out in the middle of the desert. And basically the way he did it is the canal had all these lights that helped guide ships through. So he replicated those on the ground in various buildings and things like that. And so what happened is as night fell, they turned off all the lights at the Suez Canal and turned on all the lights in this place just in the middle of the desert. And so when the Germans got there, they bombed the wrong place. In addition, he created this blinding device to try to basically dazzle the Germans when they were trying to bomb. What it was is a spotlight pointed up like a disco ball. Like, have you ever pointed lights at a disco ball out and reflects like that? He did that so that it was pointing up in the sky. So if you're looking at it at a bomb, you just have all these lights shining in your eyes, and people would go blind essentially looking at it, so they'd miss their target. So he did that as a way to protect the Suez Canal. And then another thing he did is he ended up dressing tanks to look like trucks by attaching these like cardboard and flat like wood structures on top of them, so they looked like trucks driving around, and instead built fake tanks so that when they were fighting Rommel, they had this army of fake tanks that he attacked, and then realized they were all fake, and meanwhile the real army had snuck away dressed looking like trucks that he ignored because he's like, oh, who cares about shooting down a bunch of trucks? Well, apparently you should, because they're actually things that matter. So stuff like that really fooled the Allies into thinking that, you know, or the Germans attacked on things. So there's just like a lot of neat stuff that he did to protect the area, misinformation. But also technologically, this is the first time we used radar and sonar. You guys know what that is? Radar and sonar. Basically, it uses it's a way, basically, in a nutshell, for you to detect planes in the case of radar, or detect submersibles or boats using sonar. It's a way of detecting troops before you can see them, which is incredibly effective if used properly, but it's actually really hard to read. Anyways, they also start using synthetic materials. For instance, rayon was introduced at this point in time. You guys know rayon? Like shirts out and things like that. It's basically fake silk. It was used for creating parachutes and things like that. Anyway, Operation Barbarossa. This is whenever Hitler attacked the USSR and broke his peace treaty with Stalin. And what's interesting about this is bar none Hitler's greatest mistake. Whenever he engages in a two-front war, he gives the French and the British time to recover and counterattack. And so basically by attacking Russia, he's kind of shooting himself in the foot. What's interesting is the relationship he had with Stalin. You know, Hitler didn't really care for Stalin, but apparently Stalin actually really liked him. Like, I've read stories that when Stalin found out that Hitler had betrayed him, he refused to believe it for like 3 days. Like, no, this is clearly a lie. Now, add this that Stalin was a paranoid dude. Like, he ended up killing 4 million of his own people because they might rise up in revolution against him. So he wasn't exactly the most mentally sound person to begin with. But like, there's stories like him sobbing that Hitler had betrayed him. He thought they were besties and things like that. So, you know, he was pretty upsetting after the fact. But anyhow, Operation Barbarossa was his attempt to invade Russia. And the thing is, the Nazis had planned to defeat Russia just as quickly as they did everybody else. They were going to have this, you know, no problem sending their tanks and the blitzkrieg. It was going to be great. They were going to conquer all Russia. They didn't need to pack winter coats. It was going to be over too fast. It would be inefficient to spend the time getting them all up. So just don't worry about it. Except that that's not how it happened. Russia, geographically, is totally different than the rest of it. So the tanks get bogged down in the mud. They're not moving fast. Winter sets in and devastates the German army. Does this sound familiar at all to you all? Not World War I. It was the Napoleonic Wars. Napoleon invaded Russia. It was a disaster. Part 2, same thing. And so it's going to be a disaster for the Nazis. But this is, of course, the bombers that we're talking about. The aircraft has changed pretty dramatically at this time. For one thing, you'll notice that we're no longer using biplanes. These actually look somewhat like modern aircraft. You know, modern aircraft is a little bit more advanced now, but yeah, this is, you know, pretty advanced stuff for the time. The design has improved, so they're faster, they're able to hold more weight, they're a lot more structurally sound, and they go higher. It's at this point that we actually have to start using oxygen because we're going so high in the air. And so you have folks with those masks on and things like that. Now the problem with bombers like this is they're really slow. And that means that gives the enemy all kinds of opportunities to go shoot you down. You see, aircraft and aircraft batteries and things like that are only good for a certain altitude, so the bombers can fly above that. That's no problem. However, they're not fast enough to get away from many fighters. Fighters that go up and knock down the bombers. So bombers had guns strategically placed all over the plane. You know, they would have some point on the back, some on the sides, on the front, everywhere. Including, they had one on the belly. This little belly turret that was basically this round thing, a track that could rotate around. And to get in it, you basically had to squat down like this with the gun sticking straight down, and you rotate it as you need to. I think at the B-52s, you had to be at a maximum height of like 5'6" or something like that, so they had short guys in it. Now, the problem with being the belly gun is the belly gun was on these hydrostatic things. If you got shot up at all, and those are punctured, it would stop moving, so you'd be stuck in it. Or there could be problems with the track, and it wouldn't quite move correctly, all kinds of things. And so basically, it's at the belly. It's all good if you're taking off and you're sitting in that thing, and you've got landing gear down. What if the landing gear doesn't come down? And the plane has to land. That means it's going to squish you. And that happened a couple times. There's stories of pilots who were flying in circles when they got back to base, trying to fix the belly gunner's position to get him out of there, and they couldn't do it. And so basically, the pilot had to make a decision that they got to land, otherwise they're going to crash and kill everybody on board. So they had to basically be the one to kill the guy in the belly. And there were stories because they could talk to each other through the radio, and the guy would be like, "Just man, sorry, just do it. You gotta save everybody. You just gotta do it." Like the guy in the belly gun talking the pilot into crushing him. I heard a story a few times where the belly gun just dropped because the track wore out. It was like fell randomly to the ground. And there's one guy that happened to him twice. He actually survived both times. Which is just like totally weird. Like what? It's like you imagine, you know, getting into second, I'm like, that's never going to happen again. Just a chunk drop, son of a, you know, just kind of, man. Anyways. Interesting stuff. It's not moving, was it? Not moving. Okay. And the bombing of London, as I pointed out. Just let that picture soak in for a second. That's a building. Yeah. I just always am amazed by it because I'm like, someone actually got that photograph. That's not Photoshopped, you know. That's not fake in any way. That's real. And I'm just like, wow. I'm talking about timing, you know. But also, I mean, just the devastation that was faced by the Londoners. And, you know, again, Hitler was trying to get the London people of England to surrender. So Churchill was countering that by saying, no, you know, keep fighting, you know, fight and don't give up and all this stuff. And, you know, it's sometimes easier said than done, you know. But it totally works. All right, last slide. Despite this, Hitler, you know, despite that it was a disaster for Hitler invading Russia, he still pushed, and there was a lot of victories. The two battles we're going to look at is the Siege of Leningrad and the Siege of Stalingrad, which were the main capitals. And the main thing you have to know about them is that they were really horrible battles. You know, think about trying to live a daily life where there's a war going on in the city. What if war was going on in London right now? There's bombs going off outside, and people are like, you know, shooting outside. I mean, where are people taking cover? You know, people run into rooms like this, smash out all the windows instead of machine gun guns and shoot people in the streets. You might be sitting at home trying to stay undercover, and people just bust down the door, and you hope it's guys on your side. You hope it's the Russians. Germans, it's not good. If you're lucky, they'll tell you to get out. Yeah. Yeah, go ahead. Don't need to ask, just need to go. So I mean, we're talking a pretty brutal fight here, you know. Same thing with Stalingrad. Now, where's the U.S. in all this? We are at home. We're having some breakfast. We're watching this on the news and going, shaking our heads saying, those crazy Europeans. At it again. And there's a significant group of people in Congress who say we need to join the war. You know, Hitler's going to go too far. We've got to go help our allies. And there's an equal number of people who say it's not our problem. And so any attempts from the U.S. to join the war are shot down in Congress. So what happens is the president is able to get the Atlantic Charter signed and also start sending support to the allies. You know, okay, we're not going to join the war, we're going to sell weapons. Everybody likes to sell weapons, right? Well, yeah, because you're going to make money. That's cool. The thing of it is, though, is we remember what happened in World War I with the, you know, the sinking of boats and everything like that. And specifically what happened is we started setting up like drop-off points. Like, I forget where exactly, I think it was Greenland. We would ship weapons to Greenland, and then we turned our boats around and England would come pick them up. And we basically sent an ultimatum, the Atlantic Charter, to Hitler saying, if you sink one of our boats, which he actually did, he sank one of our boats, I forget the name of it, but we said, if you sink any more of our boats, we're going to go to war. And the Atlantic is protected zone. Basically tell Hitler, you try to sink anything in the Atlantic area, it's war bound. And so we threw the gauntlet down Germany. See, Germany was like, we don't know what to do about this. But that was enough for Japan, who had already been threatened by us not selling gasoline, that they decided to sneak attack us at Pearl Harbor. Now, here's how it actually went down. It was actually a mistake to some extent. They had intended to declare war on us and then attack, which would have been seen as not exactly honorable, but at the same time, well, that's acceptable. That's you declare war and then attack. Except they got the time wrong. So basically, the attack on Pearl Harbor went down, and then diplomats arrived in Washington, D.C. saying, we declare war on you. It's like, we kind of figured. Thanks for noting that. Thanks for letting us know. But anyhow, the intent of Pearl Harbor was to destroy the U.S. Navy. That was a major U.S. Navy base. Most of our Navy was there, most of our battleships and aircraft carriers. And they were all in one place. So if they could destroy them all, that would knock out our power in the Pacific theater. We couldn't project power, so we rebuilt everything. And the Japanese were confident that they could secure the Pacific so we couldn't take it back from them by that time. However, it didn't quite work out that way. It was a fairly complicated battle that went on. They weren't able to sink as many boats as they needed to. The first plan was actually sink enough boats in the harbor itself that we could maneuver boats out of it until we kind of got everybody out. So that didn't quite work out. And then they called off the attack. The admiral who was doing it, whose name escapes me, because brain. Yamamoto. Admiral Yamamoto. Pretty model. I'll think of it. But anyhow, it basically ended up in a disaster. And he ended up saying that he really didn't think we'd done enough damage, that the attack wasn't going well. It looked like all intents and purposes it was going well, but he didn't feel that it was actually doing enough damage. It was taking too long. He pulled his troops out. And there's this famous quote of him saying, I feel we've done nothing but awaken a sleeping giant, and that's going to prove kind of foreboding words because the U.S. will outproduce Japan in the long run. But let's put it this way, the Japanese, they knew how to fight on Navy. Now this is really good. Especially the first major battle of the Pacific theater and really badly in the U.S. We were able to outproduce. That's how we won the war, essentially. But anyhow, that's Pearl Harbor. And Pearl Harbor is kind of complicated in a lot of other ways. You know, people will see it as very tragedy in the U.S. because it's always people died when we weren't at war. It was a attack when we were technically at peace, but I find that at the same time it was really a galvanizing effect in terms of bringing people together in the U.S. I mean, all opposition for the war produced disintegrated Pearl Harbor, so people were all about it. Any questions? That's it. Quiz on Wednesday.